The world was changing, and no one could predict how it would end. In the quiet fields of America, in the busy factories, and in the homes of millions, a battle was raging. A battle not fought with soldiers, but with tariffs. The trade war between the United States and China was more than just a political game. It was a fight that would affect real people. And in the middle of it all, ordinary Americans were left wondering, would they survive the storm? Chapter 1. The Promise of America First. In 2016, something big happened in America. A businessman named Donald Trump ran for president. He was rich, powerful, and bold. His campaign slogan was simple, but it spoke to many people. America first. America first, Trump would shout at his rallies. People cheered. It was a promise to bring jobs back to America, a promise to make America strong again. But there was one problem, a problem that Trump could not ignore. China. He believed that China was taking advantage of America. For years, he argued that China was stealing American jobs, stealing American money. Why should America keep losing? Trump would ask, his voice full of anger. We need to take back what's ours. He believed that China's trade practices were unfair. China would sell cheap goods to America, but American companies couldn't sell their products in China. They're cheating, he said. This isn't fair. Trump promised that if he became president, he would change that. He would make China pay for its unfair trade. He said he would fix the trade deal and bring American jobs back. And people listened. They wanted change. But Trump's solution was risky. Very risky. He talked about tariffs. Tariffs are taxes that governments put on goods from other countries. Trump said, "We'll put tariffs on Chinese goods. That'll make China pay." A tariff would make things from China more expensive. And Trump believed that when China saw how much it was costing them, they would stop being unfair. He was sure of it. But not everyone agreed with him. Many people, even in his own country, didn't like the idea of tariffs. This is dangerous, they warned. It could hurt American businesses. It could hurt American workers. But Trump didn't listen. America has been losing for too long, he said again and again. Now it's time to win. He was ready for a fight, ready to challenge China. He was ready to do whatever it took to make America strong again. His supporters were excited. They believed in him. But not everyone was so sure. Behind closed doors, his advisors were nervous. What if the tariffs backfire? They asked. What if China doesn't give in? What if we lose jobs? What if the economy gets worse? But Trump wasn't afraid. I'm not worried, he said. I know what's best for America. He didn't care what people thought. He didn't care if it was risky. Trump was determined to keep his promise. He wanted to change the rules, and he would do whatever it took. The world began to watch. People from all over the globe were paying attention. What would happen next? Would the tariffs work? Or would they cause even bigger problems? The tension was building. Every day there was a new headline, A new story. Would Trump really make America great again? Or was he about to start a trade war that could hurt everyone? People were waiting for answers, but Trump was quiet. He wasn't going to stop. He was ready to fight. He was ready for the challenge, and nothing, not even the biggest problems, would stop him from keeping his promise to the American people. America first, he repeated over and over. America first. The stage was set. The world was about to change. And it was all going to start with China. Chapter 2. The tariffs are coming. In 2018, the world watched as President Donald Trump made a big decision. A bold decision. He announced that the United States would impose tariffs on Chinese goods. What is a tariff? Well, it's like a tax on products from another country. It makes them more expensive for people to buy. Trump believed this would hurt China. It would make their products less attractive to Americans. And that's exactly what he wanted. He wanted China to feel the pressure. China has been cheating us for too long, Trump said, his voice loud and angry. It's time to stop the theft. Trump wasn't just talking about a small problem. He was talking about years of trade imbalance, years of unfair deals. He wanted China to know that America was not going to accept it anymore. The tariffs were high, really high. 25% on many Chinese goods. That means if a Chinese-made product cost $100, with the tariff, it would cost $125. Trump believed this would force China to negotiate. He thought China would come to the table, willing to make a deal. But there was a problem, a big problem. China didn't back down. They didn't give in. Instead, they did something unexpected. They responded. They also imposed tariffs on American goods. The trade war had begun. And it was like a storm that no one could control. At first, people didn't know what to expect. Would it get worse? Would it end quickly? Or would it spiral into something bigger, something dangerous? It didn't take long to see the effects. In America, the prices of everyday items began to rise. Electronics, clothes, shoes. All of a sudden, things cost more. Ordinary people were starting to feel the pain. Farmers, especially, were worried. They had sold a lot of their crops to China in the past. Now, China was putting tariffs on American crops like soybeans, corn, and wheat. The soybean farmers were the hardest hit. They were watching their profits disappear. "What are we going to do?" one farmer asked, his voice filled with worry. "China is our biggest customer. Without them, we don't know if we can survive." The pain wasn't just in the fields. It was in factories, too. Companies that made things like cars and machinery felt the heat. American-made products were now more expensive for Chinese buyers, and that hurt their sales. Workers in those factories felt nervous. Could they lose their jobs? Across the ocean, in China, the government stood strong. "We will not be bullied," they said. "We will protect our interests." They believed they were in the right, and they weren't going to back down. But what about the rest of the world? People outside of China and America began to worry. Markets around the world were shaky. Stock prices went up and down. No one knew what the trade war would mean for their countries. Would the world economy be hurt? Would businesses in Europe, Asia, and Africa feel the effects? Everything was uncertain. No one knew how long this fight would last, or how it would end. The tension was thick. Trump was sure of one thing. "We'll win this war," he said. "America will be stronger than ever." But deep down, even Trump had to wonder, what if it didn't work? What if the tariffs hurt America more than China? What if, in the end, everyone lost? In China, leaders were saying the same thing. "We will fight until the end. China will not give in to pressure." And so, the trade war continued. No one knew who would win. The world was caught in the middle. Some people thought it would all blow over. Others thought it would get much worse. As the days went on, the world held its breath. Would the tariffs work? Would they push China to change? Or would it all turn into a battle that no one could win? The pressure was building. Tensions were rising. The storm was far from over. And in the middle of it all, ordinary people, workers, farmers, businesses, waited to see what would happen next. The tariffs were just the beginning. And no one knew how it would all end. Chapter 3. China's Response. China was not afraid. No, they weren't going to give up quickly. At first, many people believed that China would back down when faced with Trump's tariffs. After all, China was a long way from America. They depended on trade with the U.S. So surely China would surrender. But they didn't. China had its own weapons, and they were ready to fight back. Almost immediately, China imposed tariffs on American goods. Soja, cars, chemicals. They were aiming directly at American businesses and farmers. Two can play at this game, they thought. For the first time in years, American farmers felt real fear. The crops they grew, soybeans in particular, were in trouble. China had always been a huge customer for American soybeans. Farmers had come to rely on China's demand for their crops, but now China was not buying. Prices began to drop. Farmers stood in their fields, looking at their crops. "How are we going to sell this now?" one farmer asked, his voice heavy with worry. "If China doesn't buy, what do we do? What if we lose everything?" For many farmers, it was a nightmare. They had invested their time, money, and hope into their farms. Now, their future was uncertain. The world seemed to be changing right before their eyes, and they didn't know if they could keep up. As the days passed, more and more farmers began to feel the pain. Many had taken loans to grow their crops. Without China's market, they didn't know if they could pay back their debts. The fear wasn't just in the fields. American businesses, too, felt the heat. Companies that sold products in China saw their sales drop. Workers in factories were worried. What would happen to their jobs? The tension was building. It wasn't just about trade anymore. It was about pride, power. Each side believed they were right, and neither was willing to back down. In China, the government made one thing clear. We will fight until the end. The people were ready. They were determined. And as the trade war grew, it became something bigger. It wasn't just about goods and tariffs anymore. It was about showing the world who was stronger. Who would win? The pressure was mounting. With every new tariff, with every new announcement, the world grew more nervous. What would happen next? Would it ever end? In America, people began to ask, how long can we keep going like this? The economy was starting to feel the pain. And it wasn't just the farmers or businesses anymore. It was everyday people, workers, families, who were starting to wonder if the trade war would cost them their jobs, their homes, and China. They were ready for whatever came next. They had already decided they wouldn't back down. This fight wasn't just about money. It was about showing strength. It was about power. As the months passed, the trade war became more serious. People began to understand that this was no longer just about trade. It was about something much deeper, something more personal. And with every new move, every new response, the world watched. Would China win? Would America win? Or would they both lose? Chapter 4. The World Watches. The world was watching. The trade war between the United States and China was no longer just a story in the newspapers. It was a global event. People all over the world were holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Would the two largest economies in the world find a way to end the fight? Or would they keep pushing each other until the damage was too great? In America, stock markets were shaky. One day, they would go up. The next, they would drop. The uncertainty was too much. Businesses didn't know if they could survive the tariffs. Workers didn't know if their jobs would be next. In China, the situation was no better. Chinese businesses that relied on exports to the U.S. were feeling the pressure. Some factories closed. Others had to reduce their production. People started to worry. Was the government really going to win this fight? Around the world, economies were shaking. Markets in Europe, in Japan, in Africa, all felt the ripple effects. If China and the U.S. couldn't fix their problems, it would hurt everyone. Global trade was slowing down. Companies that depended on cheap goods from China were starting to panic. The media couldn't stop talking about it. News outlets around the world broadcasted the latest updates. What will Trump do next? They asked. How will China respond? It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about trust. Could the two countries ever trust each other again? Was there a way to reach an agreement, or was the damage too deep? In the middle of this chaos, ordinary people were beginning to feel the effects. Mark was a factory worker in Ohio. He had worked in the same factory for 20 years, making car parts. I don't know what's going to happen to us, he said one evening, his voice filled with worry. One day, I'm working full-time. The next, they're cutting hours. If this keeps up, I might lose my job. Mark wasn't alone. Workers all over the country were feeling the pressure. Their jobs, their futures, were uncertain. Would their employers be able to keep up with the changes? Or would they have to lay people off to survive the trade war? And then there were the farmers. Julia was a soybean farmer in Illinois. She had spent her entire life growing soybeans. I've never seen anything like this, she said, her voice trembling. The prices are falling. We've lost our biggest customer. If China doesn't buy our crops, what will we do? Farmers like Julia were losing hope. They had always relied on China to buy their crops. Now, with the tariffs in place, they didn't know what to do. They couldn't afford to wait for things to get better. They needed help now. Back in China, things weren't much better. People were also feeling the pressure. Some businesses closed down. Others saw their profits shrink. Workers in factories feared for their futures. Would they be the next to lose their jobs? And still, the fight continued. Both countries were locked in a battle, each unwilling to give up. The tension was growing stronger with every passing day. Could they find a way to end it? Or was this the new reality? A world where both sides fought, but neither could win. The question that everyone was asking, how long could this last? Politicians in both countries tried to make deals, but each side was stubborn. Each side believed they were right, and the more the two countries pushed, the more the rest of the world felt the pressure. In Washington, Trump was firm. We're not backing down. We will win this fight, he said. In Beijing, the Chinese government echoed the same sentiment. We will protect our interests. We will fight until the end. The fight was about more than trade. It was about power. It was about who would come out on top. But as the months passed, people around the world started to wonder, what was the cost? Who was really winning this war? In the end, the world was holding its breath, waiting for an answer. Would China and the U.S. find a way to come together? Or would this war keep dragging on, with more damage, more pain? The world was watching. And no one knew what would happen next. Chapter 5. The world watches. The trade war was no longer just about two countries. It was bigger than that. The world was watching. Everyone felt the pressure. The whole globe was holding its breath. Stock prices were dropping. The markets were nervous. People didn't know what would happen next. Would the war end? Or would it drag on forever, hurting everyone in its path? In Europe, businesses worried. In Asia, people started to fear the long-term effects. They knew one thing for sure. If the U.S. and China didn't stop fighting, it could hurt everyone. The world was connected. What happened in China and America wasn't just about them. It was about the world economy, and the world was scared. Would this battle between the two largest economies in the world cause a global disaster? In America, the media had one question on their minds. What will happen next? Some news stations supported Trump. They believed he was doing the right thing. He's protecting American interests, they said. We've been losing for too long. But not everyone agreed. Other reporters said the tariffs were damaging the economy. These tariffs could cost American workers their jobs, they warned. What about the businesses? What about the farmers? These are serious questions, a reporter said, looking directly into the camera. The world is watching. What will Trump do next? The tension was growing. Every day there was a new headline, a new twist in the story. The world waited for the next move. Some American businesses were starting to feel the pain. Companies that sold products in China began to lose money. Their sales were falling and profits were shrinking. Some had to cut jobs. Workers in factories started to worry. How much longer will this go on? One worker asked, looking around at his colleagues. Are we next? Will we lose our jobs? It wasn't just the big companies. Small businesses, too, were hurting. People who depended on imports from China saw their prices go up. They couldn't afford the same goods anymore. Everything was more expensive. And it seemed like it was only going to get worse. The uncertainty was spreading, like a shadow over the world. People didn't know if the trade war would end soon or if it would keep going. No one knew what would happen to the economy, to jobs, or to their future. In the middle of this, the stakes were high, higher than ever. People understood that what happened next could change everything. Every decision, every tweet, every speech from Trump could have a huge impact on the world. Farmers in the U.S. were worried. Companies that sold goods to China were worried. Workers in factories were worried. And around the world, leaders were watching closely, wondering if they would be next. The tension was building. It felt like the whole world was standing on the edge, waiting for a push. Would Trump keep fighting? Would China back down? Or was this the start of a battle that could change the world forever? And then, one night, as the world sat and watched, Trump made an announcement. Everyone waited for his words. The tariffs will stay, he said, his voice firm. We won't stop until China agrees to change. The world held its breath. What would China do? What would happen next? As the world waited, the uncertainty felt heavy. What was going to happen? Would the two countries come to a deal? Or was this just the beginning of a bigger fight? One thing was clear. The world was watching. And the future seemed uncertain. Chapter 6. Ordinary Lives, Big Consequences. The trade war wasn't just about politics. It wasn't just about power or money. No, it was about real people. People like John. John was a soybean farmer, and he had spent 20 years of his life working the land. His hands were rough from years of planting, growing, and harvesting. But now, standing in the middle of his fields, he wasn't sure if he could keep going. "I don't know what to do," John said quietly, looking out over the land. His voice was heavy with worry. "I've been farming for 20 years, but now, I don't know if I can keep going." He had worked hard, built his life around his farm. Soybeans were his livelihood. But since the tariffs were put in place, everything had changed. China, which had been one of his biggest customers, wasn't buying his soybeans anymore. The price of his crops had dropped. He didn't know how to survive without that market. John wasn't the only one. All across America, people were facing the same challenges. Workers in factories were losing hours. Some businesses were forced to close. People were losing their jobs. Their futures seemed uncertain. The trade war wasn't just about politicians making decisions. It was about families. It was about lives. It was about the people who depended on the work they did to feed their families and pay their bills. In a small town in the Midwest, Sarah worked in a factory that made parts for cars. "I don't know if we're going to make it," she said one day, sitting with her coworkers during a lunch break. "They're cutting our hours. Some people have already lost their jobs. What happens if this keeps going?" Her words hung in the air. Everyone in the factory could feel the pressure. No one knew what the next day would bring. They didn't know if they would still have jobs next month or even next week. The uncertainty was tearing at their nerves. It wasn't just the workers in factories. It was the small businesses, too. Mike owned a small store that sold electronics. "The tariffs are killing us," he said, running his hand through his hair. "Prices are going up. We can't sell as much. And people can't afford to buy what they need." It was hard to ignore the effects of the trade war. People could feel it in every part of their lives. At the store, at the factory, on the farm. It was there, like a shadow following them everywhere. But not everyone felt the same. There were those who still believed in Trump's promise. "We're going to win," Trump had said. "America is going to be stronger than ever." Some people still held on to that hope. They believed that the pain would be temporary. They believed the tariffs would force China to change, and when that happened, things would get better. But there were so many questions. Would the tariffs really work? Would China change its ways? Or was this fight only going to get worse? The story of the trade war was still being written, and no one knew how it would end. Could the world's two largest economies find a way to stop the fight? Could they come to an agreement that would help everyone? Or would the trade war continue to hurt people, ordinary people, for years to come? The pressure was building. Every day, it felt like the world was waiting for something to change, but no one knew what would happen next. For John, for Sarah, for Mike, life was getting harder. The world seemed to be changing faster than they could keep up. They didn't know how much longer they could hold on, but they kept going. Day after day, They did what they had to do. They worked hard, even when it felt like the odds were against them. And as the trade war dragged on, one thing was clear. The consequences were real. People's lives were being changed, and no one knew what the future would bring. It was a tough time, a time of uncertainty, a time when hope and fear mixed together. The trade war wasn't just a political issue. It was a story of people, a story of struggle, and a story that was still unfolding.